Hi, everybody. Cynthia Allen. Welcome to the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit and the Deeper Feldenkrais Teachings track. And first, I want to start off with just a little bit of an apology for the fact that our morning lesson with Eric Feely did not happen in the live airing time period. We do have it up on replay for you. With a summit, we have to rely on many things that are outside of our control. And the service that we're using, working 100% of the time, is unfortunately outside of our control. Whether or not your email carrier delivers your emails to you is outside of our control. We're pretty pleased actually this year. We have had way fewer customer service issues. So we know we learned a lot since last year, but a lot about communicating. We could still get better. We can still see how we can get better, but we know we're learning. But we also changed a lot of technology this year in order to deliver the summit in a really different way. And I'm actually pretty pleased with the way that it's going in terms of allowing people to have chats and then having these tracks and this capacity to have captions and then meet people across different language barriers with those captions and the translations that we're getting from Google Translate, and then these panel discussions. I'm very pleased with these panel discussions. I wasn't really sure how they would go, but I'm quite happy with them, and it seems like you all are happy with them. And so I think the risk of trying something other than Zoom has actually been worth it in the end, even though it's not perfect. But actually Zoom wasn't perfect either last year, so things always look greener when you look back sometimes, most of the time. So here we are. We are actually here on Moshe's birthday, born in 1904 on this date. And I'm happy to get to reintroduce you again. If you tuned in before for the panel discussion with these two folks, I get to introduce them again. First, I want to say hello to Donna Ray. She is an internationally known teacher and trainer of the Feldenkrais method. She is a psychotherapist, and she has trained and presents in the interpersonal neurobiology work that Dan Siegel has pioneered. As you might remember her last year with Dan Siegel talking about that work. She's educational director of the Feldenkrais Institute of Vienna and the director of Feldenkrais Southern California. She has 30 years of practice, and she really loves the possibilities of working across the entire gamut of human desires and needs and what they want to do with their lives. So welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. And then we have Alan Questel, who is known for his humor and creativity and very down-to-earth way of teaching, and trained with Dr. Feldenkrais in Amherst in 1983, and he has been lecturing and teaching in hospitals, colleges, and professional training programs throughout the US, and then in Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, France, Italy, Sweden, Norway, Japan, Canada, and Colombia. So been doing many things, has taught at the university level, and was an actor before he became interested in the Feldenkrais method. And just many good things. We're going to get to hear from Alan later a little bit about some new passion he's got going on. So welcome, Alan.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Well, I think that we have figured out how to hit our rhythm together. And so I'm looking forward to this discussion of the deeper Feldenkrais teachings. It seems like a good thing to do on Moshe's birthday is to honor maybe some of his original intent a little bit more than is sometimes possible. The truth of the matter for me is this: the summit is to reach people outside of ourselves. I know it is very exciting to the Feldenkrais community, and I understand that the Feldenkrais practitioners are getting a lot out of it, but my desire is to reach outside of ourselves and not be so insular. And in doing that, of course, we had this discussion, particularly in Paul's talk, about the need to bring it into some way that relates to individual people's interests and needs. But then I wanted to come back and visit really what was Dr. Feldenkrais intending with his work at the deepest levels. So we've had 3 talks so far. We had Paul Rubin talking about maturation and the emotional aspects of the work. We had Elizabeth Behringer just finished talking about how martial arts influenced the roots of the Feldenkrais method. And we had Donna Blank talking about this embodied way of being together in this dance that we sometimes talked about in the Feldenkrais work. So we had great 3 speakers getting us started, and I think some of them are over in the chat today. I believe Paul particularly told me he would be over there, so we're glad to have him. Anyone else that's there that wants to make themselves known can tell Arlene, and she can let me know they get there. So, wow, where do we start with this? So, it seems like maybe we could start out talking a little bit about maybe jumping off of Paul's talk a little bit more about differentiating between maturation or choices or emotion, or how can we maybe add to what he already offered us in his presentation?
You know, what came to my mind while listening to Paul speak was truly the sense of self-inquiry. And that, to me, is the deeper meaning of the Feldenkrais method. So how we learn how to observe ourselves and question what we're thinking, what we're feeling, how we're acting, how those things go together, and to recognize our habits and see that there are so many more options. And, you know, when we spoke last time, we discussed how being immersed in the Feldenkrais method, awareness through movement, and also with a hands-on work, functional integration, we find ourselves doing new, surprising things. We have the desire to do things like learn things that we may not have even considered before. But I think that Dr. Feldenkrais over and over in his teachings talks about waking people up, getting them out of their robotical responses, being able to self-reflect, really question. And Elizabeth talked about that too when she stayed with Dr. Feldenkrais in Tel Aviv, how he constantly represented the other point of view. And so being destabilized, we talk about destabilization, but in the Feldenkrais method, we're actually given something new and different to do to replace the old habit. So there's a transition or a transformation that takes place when we let go of the old and we bring in the new.
I'd like to add to that. The idea of maturation, I mean, is I think a very deep part of the Feldenkrais method. It was in the title of Moshe's first book. And I liked how Paul talked about it as not a place to arrive, but it's a process that we're always engaged in. And, you know, even the word, if we take it apart, we have to say, well, what is the real act of maturation is it comprised of? And I think that it can't be seen as just one thing. These aspects have to be united together. And I think one of the first aspects that, of course, is kind of one of the basic tenets of our work is choice. But just because someone has choice doesn't mean that they're mature, right? And then I think a mature act is a choice with some understanding of how it impacts on the individual who's making the choice and the people or the world surrounding them. And part of that act, to me at least, has to do with having the ability to differentiate our feelings from our actions, to be able to know this is a hard decision to make, but it's actually the more mature one, right? It's the one that's going to have the best outcome to the people, not just for myself, but to the community that I'm part of, whether it's just one other person or a group of people or a country even, you know. And this is this developing ability of maturation is something that we need to practice it, and we need to make mistakes in it. You know, no one gets mature without making a lot of mistakes, you know.
Okay, so this, I think that the difficulty, of course, Paul made a great distinction. I mean, of course, we understand vocabulary. We would know that maturation and maturity are not the same thing, and yet we really do blend them as if they're the same thing. And I think we also think of arriving as an adult at some age period, and we don't really have a verb for adulting, but the truth is that we're just adulting right there. And I didn't make that up. Of course, someone else came up with that, and I have no idea who. But adulting, our whole lives, if we're lucky, we're adulting. We're in the process of continuing to grow and to become. So I think that is I think he gave us an important, if not obvious, it should be obvious, but not obvious distinction there. And then I think what you're saying, Alan, is the idea of really learning to differentiate emotion from choice. I mean, knowing, first of all, do we have a choice? I mean, I think we've all been in situations where we think we have a choice, but really somebody else can say, actually, I'm not sure you do. Everything that you present to me screams that you don't have a choice, that you only have one option here. And I've known over the years in relationships where people were upset with their marriage, but they did not have a choice to leave. I mean, that was clear with their value set. And it's not that I thought that they should leave. It's that I think when you don't have a choice, it makes it very different. And so this idea of I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, Alan. I think I'm kind of interested in that. Like, how do we tease apart choice, not choice, emotion from action?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to talk about. I mean, actually, I think I have to be careful saying this because it's not an absolute, but that more often we do have a choice. We just don't like the choices that are available to us. Like if I'm in a bad marriage, it's like, okay, I can be in this bad marriage or I can be alone. That's not a great choice. I'll take what's known, And I think that, I mean, Moshe talked about having 3 variables to really have a choice, which implies a movement between things. With 2 things, we can get a little stuck between those things. And I think that, I don't know, that to be able to differentiate our feelings from our actions. This is a really complex thing. I talk about it both in terms of the emotional life that people have and being able to live a fuller life. But for example, I recently gave a talk in one of my trainings around money and more the feelings that arise around money and how can we differentiate our actions as opposed to our feelings. Like if someone doesn't pay me, right, for whatever reason, how do I react? Do I shut them off, that's it? Or do I come with some understanding of this was an exceptional circumstance? Or is there some dialogue that happens between us? But for me, like when I see myself in a mature place, in that dialogue, I'm not looking for my outcome. I'm looking for an outcome that will hopefully satisfy both of us to some degree. Don't always get there. But it's the process of engaging that way that I think is what demonstrates some level of maturity as opposed to just, no, this is my way and this is the right way.
Yeah, Donna, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I'd love to bring it back to something concrete because that's one of the aspects of practicing the Feldenkrais method that's so amazingly deep and profound is that Dr. Feldenkrais had these ideas. How do we wake people up? How do we put them in the process of understanding themselves and how they work in all these different ways, emotionally, thoughts, integrating sensation into action. So in a training program, in a workshop, in an awareness for movement class, we often spend a great deal of time on ourselves, sensitizing ourselves to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then we frequently go from very slow introspective movements to larger movements until people actually have to become aware of the people around them in the room to conduct those movements in a harmonious way. And, I have an example that I think this is profound too. I was teaching in Japan and a particular student had taken numerous workshops with me. And he said, when you tell us to become more aware of what we're doing as individuals and to refine that, it makes me very uncomfortable. because we're so tuned into our community. And I said, well, of course, I respect that, and there are differences in all cultures. And I said, the interesting thing is that when everybody pays attention to themselves for a short period of time, they actually become more similar in the movement because it becomes more highly integrated and efficient. And then everybody in the room actually looks more similar while they're doing a movement, say rolling over to sit up, for example. And
Okay, can you back up a little bit and say that again? I think that's really key.
yeah, so we work with ourselves to become more efficient in our own movement personally. And then you see that in humanity, we all roll over and sit up much more similarly when we're more highly integrated. And everybody in the room is cooperating. They're aware of each other. And so I asked this student to sit and watch for a little while and to see what was happening. And he was, really impressed with how the transformation took place and how people were conducting themselves in this human way that was really beautiful to observe.
What a lovely translation of his concern in some fluidity there that you saw and created. That's not manufactured. It's real between the work and what is his value system and his cultural value system.
Mm-hmm. And I think that pertains to what you were just saying, Alan, about maturity. It's like, how do we work on ourselves in sort of a laboratory situation and then take that to other people and say, how is my behavior affecting others? And when we're in an integrated place and we're feeling that harmony, it's so much easier to get rid of the self-importance and to move toward integration in society as well as within ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's not a given that people take the work and let it affect other aspects of their lives. It's not a given. I mean, from what I've seen, it's not a given. I mean, maybe it depends on a variety of factors. I think one thing it might depend on is when you go back out into the world and from the classroom, let's say you take the immersion process of the Feldenkrais training, which I do believe is incredibly impactful. And I believe that weekly classes are impactful. I believe private sessions are impactful, but I do think the immersion process is quite revolutionizing on the psyche and the body as well. But I also see that it's not a given when one leaves there that we go out and we behave differently in the world. That I think is a choice. I mean, I raised this last year with Russell because I think it's a choice. I'm not sure, but it seems like it might be a choice. And maybe it's also what the circumstances or environment of our life outside of it is like as well. So, for example, I saw that I started to change in how I interacted with other people after my training, particularly my management style and friends, but I didn't change very much how I interacted with my husband until my husband said, "Hey, that's really not fair. Why are you continuing to interact with me this way when you don't do that with other people anymore?" And then I had a choice to think, I had a choice before, but it really didn't have to do it. I didn't have to make it, but the environment allowed, he provided a constraint for me that made me start to go, I think he's got he's got a point there that's realistic. And now I can start to make it even more, maybe let it affect my life even more. So this idea of choice, how we take it out of the experience and the realm of the Feldenkrais experience and into our lives, I think it's kind of complex.
There's a number of things that you say in there. One is that not everyone takes on the ongoing process of developing themselves. But then, I know a lot of people that, and I hope this doesn't sound a little harsh, but sometimes when I hear someone complaining about someone, I think, well, you should have seen them before.
Yeah,
that they've actually
true.
come a long way, and it's like,
That's also
and
true.
I think one thing that Paul talked some about was compulsion and habit, which some people confuse as the same thing. I don't think they are. I think a habit is something that when we become aware of, often we can interrupt it, whereas a compulsion has more of a negative connotation that has anxiety associated with it and is harder to interrupt. And the question for me becomes, in this process, as we come to know ourselves, how do we engage not just around our habits, but around a more compulsive behavior, which is really tricky, or how to utilize our compulsions in a more positive way, so that, and this is all part of that bigger picture of maturity of what it means. And that, we can only talk about it in this linear way using language and stuff, but it's like all these things are jumbled together, interacting with each other at all moments, it seems.
So do you see sort of habit at the beginning of the compulsion continuum?
Sure.
Is that what you're saying?
Well,
There's
I actually
habits,
looked it up.
and then there are things that are more severely embedded. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I actually looked at some of it, and that's, there's habit, compulsion, all the way to addiction, and these things are kind of used interchangeably in terms of how people describe themselves, and that compulsive is associated more with a psychological disorder.
Right.
Addiction is more with substances and things like that. And habits, of course, we all have habits. So that's something that we have good habits, we have bad habits. But becoming aware of it is the first step in the transformation, at any level,
Yeah.
I think.
So if we look at that sort of as a continuum, and I think there's a lot of nuance to this, so we're simplifying. What we do in the Feldenkrais method is to slow things down, to slow things down so that people can sense and feel the urge to do something. And so when we're going fast, that's much more difficult. But when we slow things down in meditation, and I think what we do is mindful movement meditation in a way. So whatever the case is, it can be stopping drinking coffee. It can be smoking. It can be stop yelling at your children. People. It can be never driving in the fast lane on the freeway. And people, apply these habits, compulsions. We can have, there's so many ways to look at this. So when people go back to sensation and breathing and movement, and they slow it down and pause, they can actually start to play with variations. Because we've looked at cognitive behavior therapy works. We can change the way that we think, and what we're saying to ourselves has an impact too. But when we couple that with sensation, and we understand that emotion often is a reaction to the thought that we're having, that we can work with ourselves with these different inroads, and it gives us more choice. And choice to me means freedom. To be free of our habits, to be free of our restrictions. Because as Dr. Feldenkrais spoke about the self-image is something that's been constructed over the course of our lifetimes with outside influence. And we believe things about ourselves that simply aren't true. And when we challenge those belief systems and we step outside of the box that we've created, all kinds of new experiences and sensations arise in us. And that's liberty.
Yeah. The thought that comes to mind when you talk about that is when we slow things down, and the idea not just of the Feldenkrais method as a learning modality, but how in it we can learn how to learn. And that took me a long time to understand what that was. And when I teach it or ask people to understand, it doesn't come easily, because it's what I've learned how to do in a learning context that's unconscious, like all the internal dialogue that I have, the way I aggressively go after something in a movement. And that slowing down really is the first place that we can start to listen to something that we don't know yet. And I think of a funny story, actually, of a student I had in Australia who he muscled through everything. His movements were like, and I'd say, do half. And he would do the same thing. And I would say, do half. And nothing changed. And at the end of the second year, we're sitting around talking. And he said, I think I struggle. And I said, I think you do too. I said, so you're ready to stop? And he went, no. And that really surprised me because it was a part of his identity that was positive to him. By the third year, he was not struggling so much. But to think it took 2 years to get to that point where he could even identify his, I would say, somewhat compulsive behavior because it was very unconscious too. So,
Yeah, I'd love to respond to that. The notion of learning how to learn through movement that's the reason that I was immediately hooked on the Feldenkrais method. So I have dyslexia. Academic learning was very difficult for me. I was tremendously misunderstood by teachers. They thought I was goofing around when I was really not understanding what they wanted from me. So I was misinterpreted a lot. They thought I was being a rebellious kid when I was really clueless. So, I work hard, and we often hear this from people. So if you have learning difficulties, the choice is, if you want an education, is you have to work harder. And the fact of the matter is you do have to work harder because you don't get it. And I have an auditory delay. I mean, a bunch of sort of weird things happening with my nervous system. And so when I entered the Feldenkrais training and started to see that there are ways of chunking material, slowing things down, putting things in new categories, actually respecting the fact that I could learn. And I was a really physical learner. I danced my whole life, starting at the age of 4. I was so motivated, I rode my bicycle to the neighborhood dance studio because that's where I felt good. So in doing these movements and realizing that I could reorganize my self-image and start to respect the fact that I'm an intelligent person was the most life-changing part of the Feldenkrais method for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Donna, could you move just a little bit closer to your computer? Is there any way you could just sit a little closer?
Sure.
That'd be great. Great. That's sort of this whole thing about this taking a while to notice. In your example, Alan, this person who noticed took a while to notice. I relate to that. It took me a long time to notice. Still takes me a long time sometimes to notice that I'm making effort because I had a value set, which was to be a hard worker. And I come from a farm, and we value people who work hard. It's so deeply ingrained. So it's very difficult when you have such a deeply ingrained thing to become aware of how much that's maybe influencing you, and you don't even really stop to examine what the other possibilities are. And then I was thinking about some of what you were both saying there made me think of Donna Blank's presentation in which she talked about the doobie-doobie-doo. And I was thinking about, what's this balance between do and be and do and be, right? And so for me, I have a tendency to be compulsive in the do. And it takes a lot to get me to drop into the be. And other people are more into the be, and they just are really hanging out in the be, and it takes a lot for them to get into the do. And it does seem like maybe the Feldenkrais method is a lot about that balance.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about that. I think it's about, and I'm the same way. When I first started doing ATM, I was like muscling all over. I didn't pay much attention really. And that this idea of learning to be, but in some, even if it's a minute action, makes it a little more approachable for me at least, and for many other people, as opposed to like meditating, which I did for many years, but initially that was a tremendous struggle for me, and then the idea of taking it into doing, which I think is, again, behind a lot of what Moshe's intention was. It wasn't just about being, it was about being is the vehicle to learn how to do in terms of fulfilling your intention, right? But to take it apart, to deconstruct it, to investigate it, it can't happen at that doing level. We just build on a faulty platform at that point.
Yeah, and that doing and being when we are really in the process of learning through movement, is so deeply sensory, and it absorbs our attention, and it creates that inner state of peace and calm when we move slow. And we talked last time about how that changes the muscular effort throughout the whole system. And then to gradually speed that up to go and do something creates the difference in how we do what we're doing. So, and I too have meditated on and off throughout my life, and sitting still, I sat and did a lot of meditation before I joined the Feldenkrais training. And when I first discovered awareness through movement, I was so relieved because I could move and find that stillness. And I thought, wow, this is the way to go. You get more bang for your buck. You know, you feel fabulous, you breathe, you stand tall, and you have this inner peacefulness that comes from meditation. So to me, it was the greatest discovery, in my lifetime.
I agree with that. So let's move on a little bit into this action piece, because that's where, in a way, Elizabeth was leading us in terms of the roots of the martial arts. And she talked, of course, about function, moving in any direction. What was the difference between acture and posture, and where can we take off on that, Alan?
Well, I guess Moshe's definition of good posture to be able to move in at least the 6 cardinal directions, forward, back, left, right, up and down, without any prior reorganization, is a description of being well organized in the world, right? That's an ideal, though, right? And I had a discovery many years ago. I was putting together a workshop for an advanced workshop that was trying to answer the questions: how long do I do something? Where do I go next? How do I know when to stop? And these are kind of like these impossible questions. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. When I'm giving a functional integration lesson, I'm answering these questions all the time. And I thought, well, how do I do that? And I thought, well, it depends on what I feel with my hands. And I thought, well, what helps me feel things better with my hands? And I realized, oh, that depends on how well organized I am. And then I thought, I don't know what that means. What does it mean to be well organized? I don't know. And then eventually it was a long investigation that continues. Just like maturation, I came up with an idea of it. Subsequently, I came up with a different idea about it. But my idea of being well organized was that my pelvis was free. So if I had the freedom, which is a large part of myself, if I'm sitting, that's a big weight to move, that means that I have the ability to move in these other directions with greater facility. And I started teaching that until I would yell out at a class, "Is your pelvis free?" And they would just wiggle their bottom. And I thought, well, that's not working. And then I thought, well, yeah, I was like, so then I thought, okay, can you stand? And I didn't mean to stand all the way up, but are you ready to stand? That meant your feet had to be in a certain place. And of course, to me, the places that I use are a relationship of my neck and my hip joints and my feet. And all of that relates to that freedom of movement in all of these different directions, which was Moshe's idea of good posture. And so I think when and this also speaks to not necessarily having a straight lengthened spine. What if someone's really scoliotic? They still have the ability to move themselves in all these different directions relative to their own structure. And because then they're well organized for themselves. And I think that this speaks to the again, the basic idea of how important functioning is, fulfilling our intention is, to everything we're doing and taking it into action like that.
Yeah, so some of the ways that we take exactly what you're describing into action, I'm thinking of students that I've had that are tango dancers, high-level martial artists, Tai Chi practitioners, golfers. I worked with a very high-level skater, ice skater, and they apply exactly what you're describing immediately after their first awareness for movement lesson or their functional integration lesson, because they're so used to tuning in to just this minor shift of weight. Or the golfer, you know, how the golfer twists the pelvis and then really swings, you know, it's so nuanced and it's so specific, and their outcome is immediate. It's like where that ball goes has direct connection to how they're moving their hips and their pelvis.
Right. Yeah.
Tango dancing, you're sensing yourself and your partner, and you actually begin by just weight shifting until you're in total synchronicity with your partner, and then you start to move. So, you know, it's beautiful that Dr. Feldenkrais was able to create this method that is immediately applicable to many things that people love to do.
And, you know, Elizabeth also talked about survival and biological necessity. And to me, that's one of the most interesting perspectives to view something from. And we don't, I mean, most of us, fortunately, don't live in the kind of cultures where it's dangerous or the kind of environments that are dangerous on an everyday level. But when we investigate that, that means that, yeah, if I had to be able to move quickly, what would I need to have in my own self-use organization to be able to do that? And, you know, there's another part to this that Moshe talked about, which is that because so much of our brain activity is relegated to standing, for example, when that's quieted down, like we talked last time about becoming more skeletal, that's when our thinking, our feeling, that's part of the process of maturation that can happen that, again, keeps folding and reflecting back on itself again and again and again.
You know, survival in our culture, like you said, we're living in a pretty safe environment, more or less. But I've had so many people share with me that they fell down and they got up without hurting themselves. And just last week, a woman who, you know, she has some serious difficulties. She has a serious arthritic condition, and a dog ran in front of her and tangled its leash around her legs, and she did a judo roll. And she's had a lot of lessons, but she said it was amazing. I just folded and rounded and I fell, and my friend went, "Wow, are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I didn't hit any of my joints." And how wonderful is that?
Yeah, I'm very interested in how the deep internal message that tells us about our biological survivability, whether or not we're being challenged that way or not, influences how we feel about ourselves in life. I think that even if we're not having that physical survival challenge, that there is a deep biological impulse that's continually asking the question, am I able to survive on my own? And the more that we can answer that question, yes, the calmer we will become. So I don't think we have to have a dangerous environment for that to be important. I also really believe, in my years of working in different environments with employees, that we, almost all of us, translate the way that we make our living into the biological survival aspect. And so we feel a kind of anxiety around whether or not we're going to be able to essentially hunt and gather enough food. And so whether or not you're doing that by having to key a certain number of things a day, I used to manage a number of women who just happened to be all women, but could have been men, managed to key all day long, and they had to key a certain volume and they had to key a certain accuracy rate. And with that, I do believe came a kind of underlying biological stress about that really relates to their paycheck, which for all of us is our food. I mean, paychecks is our food. That's what that is. It just is a different currency. So I do think that even though we're not being, maybe some of us are not being, or most of us in the United States anyway, are watching this, are not being physically challenged around our survival, we are still emotionally quite challenged around our survival in an environment in which production is extremely important. Actually, someone was just having a conversation with me offline about the hope that we would start having more discussions about, how do we in the Feldenkrais method work together more? And I actually think the answer to that is to get outside of ourselves. And the more that we get outside of ourselves and the more that we see that our work is received in the world for what it's valued, we will not have as much of those problems internally. Because right, you need to feel, any of us who are trying to make a living, you need to feel that it's a biologically viable living. So I think it all really does interact together, even though we're not physically maybe in challenge right now. So I think it's very relevant, very relevant.
There's another aspect of this that's probably more appreciable to all of us, which is aging, which is what's the biological necessity there. And a number of years ago, I was teaching in France with Miriam Pfeffer, one of the original people who trained with Dr. Feldenkrais. And she wasn't well, and she was pretty fragile. And we were going out to dinner, and in her apartment, there were a few stairs to go out the front door. And she turned to me and she said, "I feel old." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "I don't feel safe anymore." Yeah. And I thought, and that's someone who's done Feldenkrais her whole life. She wasn't well, as I said, but that there's an ability to feel safe. And I'm not just talking about psychologically, emotionally, but physically safe, that like your student, Donna, who could do a judo roll, when a dog, ran underneath her or something, it's like, that's phenomenal. That's a sense of safety and ability, capable, and that, I do have choices. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so falling down and getting up. And I know you've taught many workshops on that subject, Alan, and that's something we include in our training program. So that gives us that inner security as we're aging, and being able to regain our balance. We talked about that last time in terms of the skeleton. And one of the aspects of the Feldenkrais method that Elizabeth brought up that we all know so well is reversibility. Is that when we start to lose our balance, how do we regain it? And is it falling with a judo roll, or is it squatting? I had another very elderly student recently fall down in the shower, and he said, "But I did what you told me. I squatted." He said, "I started to fall back," because when he loses his balance, his head goes back first, and that's very dangerous. So he said, "I didn't do that." He said, "I squatted and I fell on my butt." And he said, "I'm sure that saved my life." That's what he said. So we can teach this individually and in groups, and we feel it in ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what's this statement that we hear, we sometimes use about creating harmony with gravity? Donna, have you, I don't know if you've used it or not, but I've heard it thrown about a bit.
It's not something that I've used generally, but I can just kind of, free associate a little bit. And I think it has to do with what we're discussing right now, is how do we put the Feldenkrais method into action? How do we sense our bones, our skeleton, feel the weight of our feet on the ground, and learn how to move? And, we also feel the lightness of ourselves when we're well organized. So when we're not organized, one of the aspects of gravity is that we feel downtrodden in a certain way, is that we begin to collapse and we feel pressure through our knees. People have achy feet, and we don't work on the feet. We don't work on the chest. We work with everything to create that harmony of balance with gravity, which is an anti-gravity response, so that our feet don't press so hard and our knees don't work as, with such difficulty. So we create this lightness of being. And to me, that's harmony with gravity.
So we have this relationship with gravity. We have this relationship to the world around us. What about that relationship with ourselves, Alan, internally? Is it also a building of a kind of harmony within ourselves, or?
For sure. And the word harmony kind of implies that all the parts are working, contributing in a way that in proportion to what the parts can do. So like we talk about the distribution of effort or the distribution of movement, so that the larger muscles of ourselves do more of the work, which means they're working less to do a larger action. And when that happens, again, that's that lightness of being. That's feeling like, I can smile while I'm doing something instead of holding my breath, and that people feel it. It's not just through Feldenkrais, but I think people find the reorganization of it through Feldenkrais. People find it through dancing, Tai Chi, yoga, all kinds of different things that they do. And there's that pleasurable feeling of both of I can do something and I can do it well and with pleasure, which is like a childlike thing. When a child accomplishes something, they're just gleeful. They're just so happy that they do a somersault terribly, but they did something, and they just feel that freedom when they do something like that. It's kind of something that again, that the Feldenkrais method, I think, can help us find that more and more and more, because it's not an easy thing to capture as we become adults and get into that survival mode and stuff like that.
Sometimes students say, okay, now that I'm doing Feldenkrais, should I stop my Tai Chi practice, or should I replace it? And I say, no, do your Feldenkrais lesson and then do your Tai Chi, and you're going to find your flow. You're going to find the harmony in your movements in that, activity that you enjoy doing, or, whatever it is, bicycling, or I would even say, I've been painting up a storm lately, and learning and the Feldenkrais method and creativity, just they go hand in hand. So often I see when I'm in a class of painters, they're criticizing their work. They're trying to get it right, and they're having a really difficult time. And it's just learning to suspend the goal and just go with the flow of creating whatever it is, a sculpture, a painting, gardening. It's like, just go with the flow, enjoy it, and apply the principles that you mentioned earlier, Alan. When to go forward, when to back up. You want a little bit of more balance in the painting. It's like, how do you apply these notions to all the things that we do in life? And that's a very deep application of the Feldenkrais method.
And this is in the second year of Amherst. Moshe was kind of yelling at Jack Hagee, I remember. And I looked and I thought, this guy is trying to teach us creativity. And I thought, the nerve, how could you teach 220 people creativity? Of course, later on, I had the hubris to write a book on it about creativity. But, it was something that really spoke to me in terms of the process of the Feldenkrais method. This idea of choice, to me, is fundamental to being creative. If I think of, and I ask people if they're creative, if I ask a group, some people raise their hand like that, and some go like that, and some look down. and I said, you know someone who's creative? And everyone raises their hand. And what's the difference? Well, I think the person who sees things as, the people who we see as more creative see choices that we don't see. They'll take a Chinese parasol and they'll turn it upside down and make it to a lamp to cover a light fixture. You go, well, that's so creative. I never would have thought of that. But I think that's what we're practicing all the time in the Feldenkrais method, both in functional integration, awareness through movement, that we're learning in this, again, that's context of no context, of how to understand something that we normally wouldn't find on our own. We need the structure of the Feldenkrais method to help us find it.
Yeah.
I think also the creative person is not very scared of the fact that the result might not be pleasing in the end. They are interested in the process of exploring and wondering where it will go, and then the sort of fiddling and unfolding of that, where we can perhaps help those of us who identify ourselves as less creative as being less scared of what's the worst that's going to happen if you turn an umbrella upside down and it doesn't, and you hang a couple things off of it and it doesn't look good. But for some of us, it feels like it could be catastrophic.
Yeah. I had a great, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm going to read something from the comments in a second, but go ahead and wrap that up, Alan.
I heard a great quote. I don't know where it comes from, that creativity is making mistakes and art is knowing which ones to keep.
Yeah.
Love that. Fantastic.
Rob writes, he's loving the stories about people discovering their success when unsafe or uncertain. What is the impact of this realization?
Well, Well, you know what? I think it applies directly to our conversation right now, is that it allows us to be more creative, to be more resourceful, to have more choice in life, and to have a sense of calmness inside because we're not so afraid of making mistakes or falling down, for that matter.
Yeah, it seems like it's the kind of the epitome to resilience. You know, and any of us that feel resilient means we have more options. I have very little options when I don't feel resilient. I'm going to protect myself. I mean, biologically, I'm going to protect myself. So if I don't feel that I can bounce back or navigate some terrain, even if it's risky, I don't feel that there's any chance of success, I'm not going to do it. I don't believe anybody healthy would do that.
You know, in Elizabeth's session too, she did a short awareness through movement lesson, and she had people move their eyes, and they were moving their nose in a clock-like way. That one of the things that we do, and she demonstrated how quickly we can change perception. So by using our physicality, using movement, we can change perception, and we actually see the world differently. And we even see, you know, if one of the things that I love to do with painting is that I paint and I leave it. I'll go do ATM and I come back and it looks like a different picture. You know, what I didn't like before I love, and then I get rid of something else. And you can do little processes like that.
Yeah.
You know, standing, eye movements. There's so many things we can do for 10, 15 minutes, and it changes perception. So I think that also empowers us so that we don't feel stuck and we don't feel, you know, like we can't get out of ourselves when we want to.
There are two things that we're kind of circling around here a little bit that I just want to identify. One is our self-image. When we have the capacity to feel resilient, it's a big change in how we feel about ourselves. If I can do something I didn't do before, I didn't know I could do that. That's a big change in how we start to think about ourselves. But there's another piece when you spoke about resiliency, Cynthia, which is Moshe's one of his definitions of health, of how quickly someone can recover from a shock or a trauma. And that's a real demonstration of resiliency, right? But how do you practice that? I mean, that's the tricky thing, right? You don't want to put yourself in situations where you're always challenging your resiliency, but you want to learn that by developing more choice in the everyday aspects of the things we do, that's kind of the back door that enters into those bigger moments where I go, wait a minute, I can actually have a choice here.
You know, that resiliency is something too that is somewhat automatic with the Feldenkrais method. And, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, life is going to give us those challenges, whether it be, you know, having a baby and recovering, having automobile accidents. We've all had them. Flying, you know, flying an airplane for 12, 15 hours or 20 or whatever it is, you know, the process of transporting oneself. And how quickly can you get up and go for it after you travel long distances on airplanes and trains? And these are all challenges to our systems. And they're just part of life. They're relatively ordinary for us.
You know, years ago, I saw Christopher Reeves was interviewed by Barbara Walters after his accident. And he was on a breathing machine. And this guy, there was so much light in him. He was so resilient in how he was coming back to functioning. And I was so moved by it that I sent him all of Moshe's books. I said, you're a testament to what it means to be healthy. You know, and this idea of resiliency, without that life's a struggle, I think.
We have another comment from Wei San. He says, I'm a retired architect and I visualize first. And what does visualization play in seeing pictures in your mind before working towards the goal of innovation or creativity?
Well, I think that's been known for a long time in athletics, that when people imagine doing something, they're actually innervating the pattern within the nervous system, and at a very, very subtle level, things are being, muscles are firing and going on. And the question is, and this is something I think from a creative point of view we have to be careful of, that in my experience of being creative both as an actor many years ago and in the Feldenkrais method, that when I get an idea to go towards something, that's in my imagination, I have to be careful not to be fixed that that's exactly how it's going to look like, because it never looks like what I first thought. It's always transforms and changes. And so I may get to that level, but it's over here now. And it doesn't look quite the same, but it's satisfying to do that. And that's another thing where we get to practice that in awareness through movement, because we have to practice being in a process without jumping ahead to a goal each time.
Yeah, and we've talked about too, is like if you think about lifting your right index finger, but you don't do it, but think it, and you can sense that your right index finger, it wants to lift. So just think it. And so there's a higher demand of the nervous system to actually inhibit. So to do something in your imagination and not do the movement and then go back to the movement, and this is part of our practice, we're refining the nervous system and its responses. And, we've all probably worked with people, for example, babies, children, even adults with cerebral palsy. And sometimes it can be really worthwhile as you get the nervous system in this very sedate, calm place, and then you do something that's stimulating. And then the muscle contractions take place a little bit, and then you get rid of them again, and you bring them back up, and you get rid of them again. And the person is practicing how to do that themselves. And, when it's a teenager or an adult with cerebral palsy, we can make that very explicit, and they become more adept at organizing themselves, even with a highly challenged nervous system.
The person who asked this question described themselves as being able to visualize. Now, it brings up the word imagine. Is it imagine? It's from an image. It's a visual process. And the thing I'd like to talk about is all the people who can't imagine. Because that happens a lot. Because in so many lessons, we'll do something on one side and imagine it on the other. And I had a woman in a training once come up to me and said, I can't imagine. And I talked about visually imagining, kinesthetically feeling it, hearing it, listening to it in some way. And she came back the next day and she said, I tried all that and it doesn't work. And I said, well, I kind of casually said, pretend you're imagining, because I can't tell. And she came back and she said, that worked.
Sometimes there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of, we feel a lot of pressure whenever we're asked to visualize or imagine something. Yeah. We recently moved our office. So we moved our office in December, and I looked at the space. I looked at probably 50 spaces, but I looked at the space and then went, okay, this can work. And I can't say that I had a clear picture in my mind. I did not. I brought in the acupuncturist and she said, this is horrible. It's never going to work. It just looks awful. And God love her, I said, she might even be online here listening to this, I don't know. And I said, wait, and of course she did see it at its worst. I want to give her credit for that. I said, wait, I'm pretty sure it's going to work. I'm pretty sure it's going to work. Now, I can't really tell you, it was a very deep internal felt sense. It really wasn't that I had a picture in my mind, but I had a very deep internal felt sense that it was going to work, and it was going to work very well. And it did. But there's something that you start to trust about yourself and what your own, whether you see pictures or you have feelings, states, or that you start to trust about yourself over time from trial and error, right? At the same time, if I think too hard about making something work, it never works. And I can certainly do that. I can say, this is going to work and I'm going to make it work, and then it never works. So it's an interesting thing to be able to start to differentiate, our different ways of approaching things that require creativity, and then learning what are the more reliable aspects of ourselves. And I guess the one that's for me is knowing that felt sense, which is going to be a process. And that I somehow trust that I have enough inputs coming in as I go that it's going to produce something that it's going to be pleasing to me, as opposed to me trying to make something happen, which I can certainly do as well.
So really embracing the unfolding process, and including that sense of self that's a strong indicator of what feels right to you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start wrapping this up, and then we can talk a little bit more as we're maybe eating some cake together. Yes, Rob, I agree. Visualizing can be a conceptual sense, I absolutely agree with that. I used to argue with my NLP husband all the time that I couldn't visualize. It turns out I visualize actually very well. I don't know why I was arguing about that. Because
Studies show that something like 5 or 6% of the population cannot visualize. And so,
yeah, but if you listen to my language, it's clear I visualize. I use almost all visual language. So it's so fascinating that to me and my perception of myself, I don't visualize, but I clearly do, because I use the word see many, many times in a day, and I don't use the word feel, sense, and hear it nearly as many times. So anyway, I want to take us into this next little section here. So any of you that have your own little cupcake at home, why don't you grab your cupcake, and we've got ours here. I think out of our three here, Alan looks like he went all out. He's got the cupcake.
Oh, fantastic.
Alan, you're killing me, man.
Cheers.
He agreed to go along with it, even though he said it wasn't really so much his style. And then he comes out with the cupcake with 3 candles. I just love that. Rob, Rob Black, did you try the little 3 dots up in the corner and turning on your webcast mode? You probably will be able to see Donna if you do that. So we're very, very pleased to have this work. I like this comment that came from one of the other talks from Mary Beth. She said, this method is like a deep well. You can take just a little sip or a good drink for thirst, or you can draw deeply and take a bath. Each person has the opportunity to get what they need, whether they take it or not. Isn't that great? And we're going to sing together, Margot. I don't know. Can I turn on some mics? I could try.
I hope so. I don't want to hear myself that much.
No.
Let me see if I could turn on. I'm going to turn on some mics randomly here, and then you guys can sing with us. And if you don't want to sing, I'll just go ahead and put your mic back off here in a minute. And I'm just going to grab some of them. Okay, here we go. Happy birthday
to you.
Happy birthday. I don't hear anybody else.
We're singing. It's because we're blocking each other out when we sing.
Oh.
I'm just going to lip sync.
I don't think is there a choral button on the
Okay, we'll try it again. Let's start again together. Happy birthday.
I'm going to imagine it. Wait, go ahead.
Okay, let's do it. Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to. Am I alone here? Come on, man.
You sing it out.
Emotion. Happy birthday to you.
To you.
And many more.
You know what, I was thinking a little bit about this as I was working in the garden yesterday. It took an hour to do some weeding, and I was thinking about the candle and thinking about the summit, and the whole song of This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine, came up. And I sure hope out of the summit that those the people that are in the Feldenkrais method that have been feeling discouraged, Alan's going for the cake, have been feeling discouraged, will let their light shine here.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful being with you, Cynthia and Alan.
Yeah.
And listening to all the talks. It's such an enriching experience, I believe, for everyone.
I'm going to eat my cupcake. I mean, Alan's already into his.
I just couldn't help myself,
I'm going to wait.
You're going to wait.
I've got my healthy muffin over here.
I've got cream cheese on carrot cake.
Ooh,
I tried for gluten-free, but they didn't have it that small. And
Well, I actually tried to stop at the vegan place, and they're supposed to be open, but then they weren't. Then I went to the next place, and they apparently closed completely. And then I had to go to my third choice.
Okay.
It was quite a little deal to get this cupcake for this today.
You guys are making me really hungry.
So while we're doing this, Alan, well, let's start with Donna. Donna, why don't you tell us what you have going on that people should know about?
Okay. Well, as mentioned before, we're starting a new training in Vienna in July, and I'm thrilled to be doing that. I have the opportunity to work with a great team there, and we're very innovative, and it's an incredibly supportive environment, and we include interpersonal neurobiology and communication skills in the training program.
Oh, wow.
And, it's been a phenomenal experience. So we just graduated our first group. We have a group in the third year, and we're starting a new one. And it's been really the most fulfilling time of my life, being the director of these training programs as far as the Feldenkrais method goes. And I continue to maintain my private practice with all ages, babies to the elderly, and all aspects of life, and I love it. And then reaching out into other communities, into the art community, into the tango community. Those are two things that I love doing, along with, my practice of the Feldenkrais method. And my fiance loves the Feldenkrais method. He doesn't want to do the training program, but he's receptive, and that warms my heart to have a partner that loves and appreciates the method too. And my kids even, they ask for lessons, and they appreciate what I'm doing. And so I know life is just so good. It's so rich and phenomenal. And having the opportunity to do this summit with both of you, it's just more icing on the cake. So I wish this level of well-being for everyone. And I do believe that the Feldenkrais method, I've been at it so long. I started training in my mid-20s, and I don't know what life would be like without the Feldenkrais method. So, there's going into the bathtub or jumping into the ocean with it, and figuring out how to swim. Yeah. So I'm so full of appreciation and gratitude for everyone in my life and beyond. So thank you.
And you can find out about Donna's programs at www.donnaray.com. And she said if you call in, she'd be happy to give you a 25% discount off of her products. Mm-hmm. I think you've got a couple products on there.
I've got several.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. You've got one on yoga. You've got one on sex. I can't remember what the other. I know you have at least those two. Those are the ones that pop out in my mind.
It's hand-eye coordination, flexibility and coordination, all kinds of things, that I've been interested in over the years. And I'm in the process of making more recorded lessons for people because they're so useful for people.
Great. And Alan, you've got something new and exciting going on that we didn't talk about last time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got, before that, though, I just wanted to say that I've taught in Donna's programs in Austria, and they are exceptional. So it's really a pleasure to teach there. And yeah, the way it's organized and the content and what people learn, it's really, really great. I really like teaching with you there.
Cool.
And of course, I've got 2 trainings coming up in 2020, one in Santa Fe and another one at Austin P University in Tennessee, which will follow the academic calendar so teachers can do it more easily. Mm-hmm. And those of you who know me probably know that a big part of my teaching is involved with the idea of helping people like themselves more. And that's kind of fundamental to everything that I do. And out of that, I've finished the latest draft. It's now going to my coach who's going to edit it, a book on kindness. And kindness, the act, actually concrete ways to create more kindness in your life. And I can say that, the whole idea, a lot of it came out of my life so far through and with the Feldenkrais method. So that's pretty exciting for me, and hopefully it'll be published soon. So good.
Well, that is very exciting. So, Alan has yes, I'm sorry. I had a moment there where I thought suddenly I got the wrong name. Alan has a sophisticated website of uncommonsensing.com. He's been putting products out there like pregnant pauses and a whole series of CDs on different organizations of programs around movement. He has a code, Summit25, that if you enter, you will get 25% off in the next couple of weeks. So if you're wanting products to help yourself move, both of these individuals, teachers, great teachers, go check those out. It's uncommonsensing.com. You can also find his connection to his training programs there. So someone did comment yesterday in one of the chats. I wanted to just read this and maybe have you all say something about this in wrapping up. I wish the training, this is Lori, I wish the training was more easily available. As a music teacher, horseman, and a Aikido, I found Feldenkrais to make a huge changes in all areas as well as daily life. As much as I've practiced over the last 3 years daily, I really want to do a training, but there's no training in my state of North Carolina at all. I suppose this will change once Feldenkrais is more available to the public. I'm actually not sure that it will change because of the extensiveness of a training. I don't know how you all feel about that, but our trainings are not a minor undertaking for people. What do you think?
I agree. I wish it was more available everywhere. And even when people talking about doing a shorter program, it kind of interferes with the immersion part of it for me. And even in 4 years, I think I could teach another 2 years. I mean, that's just the jumping off point for people. And I guess I can only recommend that, because I speak to a lot of people who have the same issues with work, family, place, and that I just encourage you to keep pursuing the work in any way you can. And then maybe one day there'll be an opening for you to do a training.
Yeah, there was one in North Carolina. I thought one was either a few years ago or one was still being planned. I think maybe Jeff might have been planning one for North Carolina coming up. Somebody mentioned North Carolina recently. I know in my state, I would not have been able to do it if it hadn't come to Cincinnati. We haven't had one here since. I have talked about trying to help organize one. I'm not sure if that's in the cards for me. It might be more in the cards for my next person in line behind me, which is Brian Shercliffe, and I think he might be able to pull that off. But yeah, I mean, it takes a lot to pull a training together in an area.
Yeah. And it is in depth. It is a long process. It's 3.5 to 4 years, and it needs to be long because we do deeply change the nervous system and the self-image, and the sensitivity that it takes to practice the Feldenkrais method is it's necessary to be able to simmer with that and to really let your sensitivity emerge over the process. So. Again, I encourage people to practice the Feldenkrais method in whatever way they can. And at some point in many people's lives, there is a moment where they go, I can do it now. So keep thinking about that and consider training programs, all over the United States and even in other countries, because sometimes they work out better for you.
Yeah.
Good. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I believe tonight is John Sharkey and the start of the structure and biotensegrity track. I actually feel like if you have to only listen to one talk that's not by a Feldenkrais practitioner, that most of the ones in the series are by Feldenkrais practitioners, but we have several non. I think John Sharkey is it, and I think he is for everybody. He's got some really interesting ideas that I think might really stimulate some new thinking around this idea of how we function as humans in these incredible bodies that we have. So worth tuning in for. And thank you, everybody. It's been nice to have some deep interaction with the two of you. Nice to laugh with all of you and enjoy a candle and a cake and a song from O'Shea. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Cynthia. Really,
Thanks.
So thankful for what you've done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.